Hello again. Dan Alasso here with Lifelong Learning. And before I go ahead and write that script for that video where I'm going to define all of these terms, capitalism, market transition, free markets, and probably also monopoly. Before I did that, I thought I should do a quick review of that Michael Merrill article from 1990 that I mentioned in that last review. And this is an article called The Anti-Capitalist Origins of the United States that appeared in Review, the journal of the Fernand Braudel Center. Adam Smith, Michael Merrill said, was an anti-capitalist who sharply condemned the, quote, mean rapacity, the monopolizing spirit of merchants and manufacturers, who neither are nor should be the rulers of mankind. The point, Merrill suggested, was that this argument and the whole question of the capitalist transition revolves around how you define capitalism. And this is why I thought it was important to talk about this before I go ahead and define it myself. Merrill said the word was not much used in the 18th century. And when it was used, he said it carried the connotations of court capitalism, the process by which political hangers-on would enrich themselves at the expense of the rest of society. Capitalism, for Merrill, meant a political economic organization of society by and for the benefit of capitalists. In this sense, he said, the American Revolution did more to retard than to hasten capitalism's triumph in the New World by bringing to power a self-conscious class of small property holders who would resist dispossession and proletarianization for more than a century. Historians, Merrill concluded, quote, universally equate capitalism with what 18th century political economists called commercial society, and take for granted that the expansion of the latter, commercial society, automatically entailed the triumph of the former, capitalism. And he said, this shift in emphasis is not inconsequential. The real question might be, was it self-conscious or was it deliberate? Because, as Merrill himself would point out in 1995, in another article called Putting Capitalism in Its Place, a review of recent literature, to equate a market economy with capitalism means that being anti-capitalist is the same as being against commerce, which everybody realizes is absurd. But back to the market revolution. Merrill said, if the wealth of nations had a single theme, it was that the moneyed interest was not the same as the public interest. The cast of characters remained the same, but Merrill saw their motivations slightly differently. Many of the former colonists, he said, were set to sweep away the monopolies, duties, prohibitions, and restraints that both the Declaration of Independence and the Wealth of Nations had complained of so bitterly. Alexander Hamilton tried to build a capitalist economy that emulated Great Britain, Merrill said, quote, not so much because he admired its economic and political institutions, but because he feared its political might. This is an interesting point because it provides Hamilton with a sort of patriotic benefit of the doubt, where other historians have been quicker to condemn him. In his letters to Robert Morris, Hamilton complained, quote, as early as the winter of 1779 to 1780, and this would be before Jefferson had published his Notes on the State of Virginia, that, and here Merrill is quoting Hamilton, a great part of our internal commerce is carried on by barter, which he thought inconvenient, partial, confined, and destructive of both commerce and industry. Most awkwardly, it also interfered with the ability of the government to raise an adequate revenue, which was the main point. Quote, the farmers have the game in their hands, Hamilton warned. Merrill went on to say, Hamilton's funding system created an artificial interest, a class of moneyed men whose wealth and income was due to public largesse and not to their own industry. And he noted that this group, quote, would evermore work to secure legislation that benefited themselves at the expense of the public. This is true and tragic. But following the logic of Merrill's story, this was not why Hamilton had done it. He did it to locate economic power in a group that was dependent on government, in the hopes that he and his successors would be able to control the economy through them. No one could imagine, of course, just how large that economy, and thus the power of this dependent group, would become in the 19th century. The Democratic, Republican, Jeffersonian, agrarian alternative, which favored discriminating between the original holders of debt and later assignees to avoid enriching speculators by assumption, and who also favored retiring it quickly, reducing taxes, and limiting banking and joint stock corporations, seems very reasonable in retrospect. Extensive rather than intensive development became more feasible after Thomas Jefferson's 1803 Louisiana Purchase. The question is, did the Jeffersonians have a viable economic plan before the Revolution of 1800 that elected Jefferson, or were they arguing in a more moral economy sense? And how did all this affect our subsequent understanding of what happened in both political and economic history? So that was what Michael Merrill had to say in 1990 in his Anti-Capitalist Origins of the United States article. As I said, very soon I will drop a video in which I will define what I mean when I say capitalism, markets, free enterprise, and all of these terms. But I hope for now you found this a little bit interesting. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you again very soon.